Hello there. Today I'm looking at a wine that's just been released onto the market. It's from Tenuta San Guido. It's the 2023 vintage of a wine they call Guidalberto. And as I said before, Guidalberto is sometimes seen as a second wine of Tenuta San Guido, the producers of Sassicaia, but really it's not a second wine in so much as that it's a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, and there's no Merlot going into Sassicaia, so it's not a wine that's being blended from parcels that have been downgraded from going into Sassicaia. The Merlot portion was always destined for this wine, so it's more sort of a second label than a second wine. Now this wine's first vintage was 2000. Just briefly, the history of Sassicaia as a wine. It's an estate where the Marchese Mario Incisa della Rocchetta first planted vines in the 1940s during the Second World War. But actually the wines were commercialised until he entered into an agreement with his cousins, the Frescobaldis, to do so. And the first vintage put on the market was 1968. I think that came in the early 70s. So the estate itself is a relatively recent creation. Following the success that Mario Incisa della Rocchetta had with Sassicaia, Bolgheri became quite a trendy place to be growing grapes, and one of the other producers that sprung up was Ornellia. The other famous wine that came from the Ornellia Estate is a pure Merlot called Masseto. So in the 1990s, when Mario's son Niccolo saw how successful Ornellia had been with Merlot, he thought it would be worth considering planting at his own estate at Tenuta San Guido. So in concert with his enologist, Giacomo Tachis, they've set about planting Merlot at sites somewhere between 100 and 200 metres above sea level, most of them, between the oratory, which is the building you see on the label there, and a famous stand of cypress trees, the Viale di Cipresse. And evidently these cypress trees had been planted by one of Mario's wife's ancestors, somebody called Guidalberto della Guidalberto. The soils that had been chosen tended to be richer, heavier clay soils that were better suited to the growing of Merlot. 2023 was a vintage where there was cold periods during the winter and there was plentiful rain, so the groundwater was well topped up, and also it was cold enough to ensure that pests and diseases in the vineyard were killed off. Budding occurred in March, but in April there was a period where temperatures fell to around zero and precautions were taken against potential frost, but thankfully that never actually materialised. May was wet and this slightly affected flowering. They say that the reduction of crop size was about 4 or 5%. The vines underwent heat stress in a very warm, dry period in July, but then in August a weather system from the Atlantic brought both cooler temperatures and a little bit of relieving rain. In mid to late August again there was a period of high temperatures that were broken by rain. Harvest started on the 4th of September for the youngest plots of Merlot and concluded with the last of the Cabernet Sauvignon on the 5th of October, so harvest going on there for over a month. This particular wine is a blend of 55% Cabernet Sauvignon and 45% of Merlot, and there's actually less Merlot in this blend than has normally been the case for Guidalberto. The wine is fermented in temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks, and they used yeasts that they've selected from the estate to do this. So these are not necessarily a wild fermentation, but it's a selection of their own autoctonus local yeasts. And those yeasts are chosen from the yeasts that are gathered, being those yeast types that give the best aromatic, perfumed expression. Aging goes on in 225 litre barriques. The majority of these are French, but they do say about 5% of the oak will be American oak. Now in the initial period of aging, the wine all goes into second fill oak barrels, and it's only in the following February that a small portion of the wine will go into new oak. The wine ages in barrel for 12 months, and then once it's bottled will spend a few months aging in the estate cellars prior to release. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? Looking at it, it has a medium ruby colour, but there's quite a dark core. At the same time, there's a fairly bright, almost orange note on the edge of the wine. Swirling it, it's got 13.5% alcohol, but it's quite readily forming tears on the side of the glass there. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? The aromas are quite fine, quite precise, quite lifted. You've got notes of juicy mulberry, maybe a little bit of raspberry with a tiny spicy hint there. Quite an underlying note of blood orange that comes through. The oak is very, very well integrated. You do just get a touch of cedar towards the end. There are some delicate chocolatey notes really well integrated in here, but actually it's that fruit vibrance, the juicy red fruits and that really lively blood orange note coming through there. To me, that's quite a typical note from the wines of the Tenuta San Guido. So let's have a taste. Initially on the palate, that's a mid-weight wine. There's a beautiful freshness. I think one of the features of the 2023 vintage, there's a lovely pure acidity retained in the fruit. Having said that, the wine opens on the mid-palate to deliver some really quite sort of dense red fruit, raspberry, loganberry, dark red plum, almost through to a sort of a spicy, bitter licorice note. There's actually a reasonable amount of grip coming from some quite fine, almost velvety, slightly chocolatey with notes of cocoa, sort of dusty cocoa powder sort of notes on the mid palate there. But after that, these lovely fresh notes of things like blood orange and mulberry reassert themselves on the finish to give a beautifully focused, fine, elegant and really quite refreshing into the wine. It's a wine with some real nervosity, beautiful perfume, lovely freshness. It's not a huge big wine. I should imagine it's good acidity, and those fine tannins will give it the ability to age for 10 to 15 years quite happily. But I wouldn't think you'd need to age it much longer than that. This is already beautifully accessible, and that's the style that's always been intended for Guidalberto. But what is so lovely about it is that I've still got this sort of beautiful, mouth-watering, fresh fruit lingering in my mouth. It's an incredibly pretty and really quite delicious wine. I had a quick look at the Wine Searcher aggregated critic score for this wine, and there it has a 93 out of 100, and I think that's a very reasonable score, especially when you think that price-wise, Guidalberto is normally about a fifth of the price of Sassicaia. I wouldn't claim that it's a scaled down version of the estate's top wine. However, I would say there are some of the features of the wine here, and some of the beautifully handled aromatics are very much along the lines of those that you would see with Sassicaia itself. I'll leave a link in the notes to Wine Searcher for their web page, which will give you more background detail and will tell you where the wine's available and at what price it is. So thank you so much for watching the video. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, do please press the like button, that would be great. If you would like to watch more of these videos, do please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It would be great to have your support there, and that way also you can set yourself an alert and be notified every time I publish a new tasting video. If you have any comments, please pop them in the comments box below. I'd love to hear what you think about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else that relates to that. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please pass it on to them. I'd really appreciate your support with that. So once again, thanks for joining me, and I do hope you'll come and join me again soon. Till then, bye for now.